So just to speak very briefly, why resource efficiency? Just to sort of set the context really for the day. What are resources? Hopefully all of you know what resources are, but fundamentally the resources that a business is normally interested in are the water, energy and raw materials. So with water is often overlooked as far as resource efficiency is concerned. People tend to sort of forget about it. But all businesses tend to use it, whether that's anything from flushing toilets and filling kettles to actually using it in large industrial processes. However, because it's overlooked, it can often actually lead to significant savings, and it's especially in an area where wastage can be a real issue. If people sort of walk past a vat of materials and they see sort of something trickling out of it and going to drain, then people will act straight away. But actually, if you go into the toilets or you go into the kitchen and you see a tap dripping or trickling down, people will tend to just ignore it, when in reality that's costing a business money, and it can be significant amounts of money. Energy, it generally relates to the use of gas, electricity and fuel oil for the purpose of lighting, heating and process use, but vehicles are also a significant area of energy use as well. So again, there's a stand out in the lunch and sort of breakfast area which sort of is promoting the sort of support that we can provide looking at vehicles as well, so do take a moment to have a look at that. Most organisations at a minimum recognise that they use different forms of energy within their organisation. However, raw materials are often associated with large manufacturing businesses. And the reality is we all use raw materials. Even in an office, people immediately think of paper, but you've also got computer screens, hardware, even the coffee and tea that sort of goes into use in the kitchen, which I think for a lot of people that run their own businesses, coffee and tea seems to disappear very quickly. So the environment we're in currently, a lot of people, they're very aware over the last 4 years we've been experiencing a significant global downturn, well, longer than that now actually. But despite that period, for instance, Chinese resource demand has been increasing. So oil demand has risen by 23%, copper has gone up by 68%, the demand for copper in China. And other commodities, the demand has increased as well. But it's not just China. The global growth rate during this period, this economic downturn, has been significant. So every country in pink over the last, since 2008 to 2012, every country in pink has seen growth, which is effectively pretty much every country on that map to some level or other. So it's the actual growth across the world is continuing, the demand in resources is continuing to grow, the emissions are continuing to sort of be increased, emissions of carbon dioxide. And in fact, it's expected that demand for resources will grow by 300% by 2050, which is a phenomenal amount in additional resources having been provided to just keep the world economy machine moving. So as the global resources, the demand for global resources increases, the availability of these resources is reducing. So many critical resources extracted from conventional sources are due to run short within our lifetimes, which is quite a hard concept to actually grasp. But for instance, indium is going to reduce, effectively the availability of indium, for instance, is going to become very scarce within 10 years or less. Can I just ask a sort of quick show of hands of who's worried about indium running out? None of you? One person. I mean, there is less than 10 years of economic supply left at this point in time, but the reason that indium running out is a concern is because it's actually used for LCD screens. So all touch screens all use indium. So, if indium runs out, how are we going to entertain the children over Christmas, in the future? So it just highlights, that, these resources, as they become scarce, it doesn't mean that they will dry up entirely. As I sort of highlighted before, it's conventional sources of these. But what it does mean is that the costs of these will go up. And there's a whole range of resources that fall into this category that that demand is starting to get to the point where it's going to outstrip supply. And what we'll see then is the cost for you to manufacture the materials or to buy the materials you need to run your business will continue to increase. Of course, another major issue to consider is the threat of man-made climate change. Currently, the UK and Scottish governments face the task of working out what the future energy supply mix should look like to keep the lights on for the next 50 years. And they have to balance the needs of energy costs, energy security, and the need for a low-carbon economy. That's no easy task at all, and that requires political insight, economic insight, industrial insight, and a very shiny crystal ball. So that's a very difficult balancing act to get right, and I wouldn't want to be the people that are having to make those decisions, because it's very difficult to know what you need to do in the future, but also what everyone else is going to need to do in the future. If everyone jumps onto the bandwagon of nuclear, rightly or wrongly, whatever your considerations are, that could actually outstrip the supply of uranium or push the costs up of supplying that material very quickly. Fred Dinning, actually, who used to work for Scottish Power, I remember listening to him speak a few years ago, and he spoke very clearly about this sort of issue about supply and demand, and he sort of highlighted that a mix was going to be the solution, which is a good answer, and I'm sure he's right. But actually then the question then is still, what's the mix supposed to look like? So it's a very, very difficult question. As far as tackling climate change, the mix of energy supply is going into it. However, that all said, there's also another aspect to tackling climate change, and that's energy efficiency, part of resource efficiency. And that fundamentally is often a no-brainer. So while the challenges of working out what the energy mix is an absolute nightmare, actually just reducing energy consumption can often be a very simple thing to take on. And hence, not making any comment on the level of brains within this room, but that's why we're focusing on this area today. Of course, the government has had resource scarcity and climate change on the radar for a number of years, and they've brought in lots of legislation, as I'm sure you're all well aware of, over the last few years, sort of looking to tackle this. So we've had things like the landfill tax regulation, which currently sits at £80 a tonne, but is due to go up to about £82.60 next year. So that's in place. We've had the waste regulations 2012. They effectively came into force beginning of this year. I think that's right. Where effectively all businesses have to present the dry materials for recycling, but also food businesses have to present food waste if they produce over 50 tonne, no. Sorry, I'm getting way ahead of myself. 50 kilograms of food waste per week. If they produce more than 50 kilograms per week, then they have to present it for food waste recycling. However, that at the beginning of 2016, that goes up to any food business that produces more than 5 kilograms of food per week, any of the non-rural at least. And that's virtually everyone. So that's going to have significant impacts on businesses going forwards. But it is for good reason. Obviously, the legislation is not just limited to waste. In 2009, the Scottish Government introduced the Climate Change Act, and this is legislation that commits Scotland in law to an 80% greenhouse gas reduction by 2050. That's an incredibly challenging target, and it's incredibly brave of the government, well, some could say brave, but I certainly would, to set that ambitious target. And that's the most ambitious legally binding greenhouse gas reduction target in the world. So that sets a challenge for all of us to actually achieve that. And obviously there's also carbon reduction commitment, climate change agreements, and the climate change levy all in force now, and more legislation to come, I'm quite sure, in the future. So we've got the stick of legislation, but we have also got the carrot of opportunity to actually, there are real win-win opportunities there for businesses to sort of implement resource efficiency and actually benefit from the savings. In Scotland, we can save in Scotland each year 2.9 billion per annum through simple resource efficiency measures. And that's a phenomenal amount of money that we can potentially save. And we are seeing that. That's not some sort of fantastical figure that's been produced out of a hat by some statistician. I mean, we are seeing all sizes of businesses, from large right down to very small, seeing significant savings by tackling resource efficiency and energy efficiency. And we're here to support that. So we can help through Resource Efficient Scotland Advice and Support Service, and through people like Scottish Power. We can actually help businesses to increase competitiveness, increase job security, and improve reputation. And all of those help as well as, you know, just the simple improvements to the bottom line.